He was of the house of Caleb. Verse 4. When David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep, David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, go up to Carmel, go to Nabal, and greet him in my name. And thus you shall say to him who lives in prosperity. See, Nabal was filthy rich. You should say to him, peace be to you, peace to your house, and peace to all that you have. Verse 7. Now I have heard that you have shearers. Your shepherds were with us, and we did not hurt them, nor was there anything missing from them all the while they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please give whatever comes to your hand to your servants and to your son David. Now David's men had protected Nabal and his sheep, and they didn't settle on a price for this protection. He was just asking Nabal to return the favor. Right. So he sent his men to Nabal to ask for help. Let's continue verse 9. So when David's young men came, they spoke to Nabal according to all these words in the name of David and waited. Then Nabal answered David's servants and said, and we'll begin to see right here how big a fool he was. Who is David, and who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants nowadays who break away each one from his master. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men when I do not know where they are from? See, Nabal lived in the wilderness area, and we know that he had a lot of sheep and goats, so that made him a prime target for thieves. Right. But David and his 600 men had provided protection for him. Right. Nabal was so rich he could have easily fed David's men, and it wouldn't have hurt him at all. David wasn't asking for a handout. He knew that part of Nabal's prosperity was because he had protected his sheep. But Nabal pretended not to even know David. He even added insult to injury by saying that David might be just another runaway slave.
Whoa.
But you know what? He knew clearly who David was.
Yeah.
He was just living up to the meaning of his name. His name meant fool, and he was behaving like a fool. Let's continue reading in verse 12. So David's young men turned on their heels and went back. And they came and told him all these words. They said, you know, we went to Nabal, but Nabal said, you ain't nothing but a runaway slave to him. Why should he give you anything? Verse 13. Then David said to his men, every man gird on his sword. See, David was a fighter. He was a warrior. So every man girded on his sword, and David also girded on his sword, and about 400 men went with David, and 200 stayed with the supplies. See, we got to remember that David was a warrior, and he didn't mind going to battle. He was a fighter. He had fought a bear, he had fought a lion, he had fought a giant, and now he was ready to fight Nabal. Amen? This is why David couldn't build a temple for God, because he was a man of war. He had fought a lot of wars, and he had blood on his hands. But one thing David did do, he gave Solomon, his son, $6 billion to help build God's temple. Okay. And Solomon built a magnificent temple for the Lord. Verse 14. Now one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, look, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, and he reviled them. Another version says, he screamed insults at them and scolded them. In other words, Nabal acted like the fool that he was. Can you imagine somebody has helped you to prosper, protected your sheep, and they come and ask you for some food, and you scream insults at them? But you know what? It was in God's divine plan that the young men told Abigail about Nabal's insulting remarks to David. She knew immediately that her whole household was in danger of being destroyed. She had to come up with a plan. Taking matters into her own hands, Abigail gathered up food for David and his men. She did what Nabal should have done. Nabal was a fool, but Abigail was the wise one. Verse 18 says, then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 bottles of wine and 5 sheep ready dressed, and 5 measures of parched corn, and 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs, and laid them on asses. Verse 19. And she said to her servants, go on before me. See, I am coming after you. But she did not tell her husband, Nabal. Abigail sent her servants ahead to try and calm the anger of David. She knew David was furious. She didn't tell Nabal because he would have stopped her from going, and a lot of blood would have been shed. She used a lot of wisdom in everything she did. Nabal's wife, Abigail, and his servants knew that he was a foolish man. That's why the servant went and told Abigail what Nabal had done. Even the servants knew he was a fool. Verse 20. So it was that she rode on the donkey, that she went down on the cover of the hill, and there was David and his men coming down toward her, and she met them. Now David had said, surely in vain I have protected all that this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed out of all that belongs to him, and he has repaid me evil for good. David said, I helped him, and now he won't even help me. Verse 22. May God do so and more also to the enemies of David, if I leave one male of all who belong to him by morning light. David was furious. He was saying that me and my men protected Nabal and his men and his cattle from thieves that would rob them, and now he won't even give my men a little food to eat. David vowed to kill every last one of them. David was a warrior.
Yes, sir.
Amen. He was a fighter.
Yes.
He said, ain't going to be not one of them left alive in the morning. Verse 23. Now when Abigail saw David, she dismounted